An infertile billionaire CEO sees his ex-wife, whom he left 20 years ago, at a winter party by alone. Before we begin the narrative, please leave a comment below letting us know where you're viewing from because there are two young males who resemble him identically. Savor the narrative. With crystal chandeliers illuminating the ballroom, the Grand Windsor Hotel provided the ideal setting for Manhattan's elite to flaunt their money and act altruistic. Jonathan Mercer mechanically nodded in response to another board member's joke while adjusting his expensive Armani tie. At 42, he had perfected the skill of appearing involved while his thoughts were focused on more significant issues. Harold Preston, Jonathan's board chairman, said, "It's a shame Rebecca couldn't come." "Last-minute migraine," Jonathan said, appreciating the justification he had made for going alone. Rebecca's envious interrogations following each incident had grown tiresome lately. Jonathan's gaze wandered across the throng as he reached for a flute of champagne that a server had offered. He spotted her at that moment. Catherine. In mid-air, his hand froze. He would know her anywhere, even though they had been divorced for 20 years. In sharp contrast to the overdone women around her, she wore a plain navy dress and her copper hair fell in loose waves. His blood ran cold, but not because of Catherine. She was flanked by two young men. Two sets of penetrating gray eyes, two faces that are exactly alike. Down to the distinctive Mercer cleft chin, his eyes were two flawless miniature representations of himself. "Are you okay, Jonathan?" Harold sounded like he was speaking from a great distance. "Forgotten," the champagne server went on. Jonathan was unable to look away from the impossibility of what he was seeing. Soon after, the young males seemed to be around 19, which was exactly in keeping with the time frame. Their separation. He whispered to Harold, "Excuse me," and began to move across the floor as though he were being drawn by gravity. Catherine noticed him mid-approach and looked up. Her face was losing color as her eyes grew wide. The young men all turned to look at Jonathan as she murmured something to them. His movements faltered at the sight of two identical pairs of eyes, his eyes, scrutinizing him with unabashed interest. A young man leaned in Catherine's direction. "Who's that man, Mom?" The other person's head cocked. "He resembles us." Jonathan paused in front of them, his heart thumping so loudly that he was positive they could all hear it. The background noise of the gala subsided to a faint murmur. He hardly controlled his voice as he said, "Catherine. I believe we should speak." She put protective hands on her son's arms and straightened her shoulders. "I wanted to know when this day would arrive, Jonathan. Are they?" The answer was written in every feature of their youthful faces, but he was unable to complete the query. "Yes," she replied plainly. "Ethan and Mason." Partially hiding behind Catherine, the smaller of the two, or maybe just the more timid, peered out with obvious curiosity. Someone close recorded the uncomfortable reunion with a flash. Jonathan hardly realized that his entire universe had shrunk to these three individuals, who had abruptly and profoundly altered everything. "How come you didn't tell me?" Torn between rage and an incredible want to get to know these young men, he said. His boys. On the other side. The space. In the corner of his eye he saw a disturbance beside the door. Rebecca had come, her keen eyes sweeping the crowd. Nothing would ever be the same when his past and present collided. With his thoughts racing, Jonathan led Catherine and the twins to a peaceful nook off the main ballroom. A pair of identical faces gazed up at him with unabashed interest. "Which is which?" he inquired, attempting to identify any distinctions between them. Catherine gestured to each of the sons. "Mason is dressed in blue. He leads and debates for us. In gray, Ethan is our observer and artist." Mason moved protectively closer to his mother as if on cue, and Ethan looked solemnly at Jonathan. "How come you didn't tell me?" Although Jonathan spoke in a quiet, controlled tone, there was tension in every syllable. "I made an effort." With her gaze fixed on the twins, Catherine answered. "I made 17 calls to your office after our divorce was finalized. I was blocked by your assistant. 3 certified letters were sent. They were sent back without being opened. Jonathan's mouth clenched. That isn't feasible. I never. I'm thirsty, Mom. Stopped. Mason's gaze remained fixed on Jonathan's face. Ethan repeated, me too, but his inquisitiveness was more nuanced. Jonathan said to a passing server, give us a moment, please. Would you please bring these gentlemen some water? After giving them a nod, the server went to get their drinks. When they were alone themselves, Jonathan remarked, you named them yourself. I had very little decision. Catherine's voice was tinted with bitterness. It was a challenging pregnancy. Being pregnant with twins is difficult, particularly if you are the only one. Jonathan combed his dark hair with his hand. I would have been of assistance. You are aware of that. Do I? The eyes of Catherine blazed. During our divorce, you made it abundantly evident that your enterprise was the most important thing. His phone vibrated before he could reply. A text message with Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. You're where? I am at the door. Catherine caught a peek of the name before he hung up. Oh, the girlfriend. Is she aware that you have 2 sons? He retorted fiercely, she doesn't because until 5 minutes ago neither did I. Catherine's face grew a little softer. After the first year, I gave up attempting to get in touch with you. A parent who didn't want the boys is not worthy of them. I didn't want them, I said. His voice was high enough for others in the vicinity to look over. Once more, he lowered it. How could I desire something I was unaware of? They saw a minor disturbance. Now that they had brought their drink back, the twins were pointing enthusiastically at an ice sculpture on the other side of the room. Jonathan's phone buzzed at that very moment, and then a recognizable voice broke through the throng. You're there, sweetheart. Who is this? Rebecca showed up next to them, dressed elegantly in a scarlet dress, evaluating Catherine with a smile that stopped short of her eyes. Jonathan saw a man using his phone to covertly take pictures at the same moment. The thing was getting out of hand. Jonathan. Rebecca pressed, her hand firmly clutching his arm. Mason escorted his brother back to his mother before he could come up with a reply. Rebecca was gazed at by 2 sets of gray eyes that were exactly like Jonathan's. Mom, who is she? Mason's tone was one of challenge as he asked. As understanding came to Rebecca's face, her immaculately manicured nails sank into Jonathan's arm. Have you done anything? She muttered. Between Rebecca's well-groomed perfection and his son's chaotic, complex reality, Jonathan stood still. 2 similar faces, with looks ranging from distrust to interest, gazed up at him. Rebecca had never heard a warning tone in Jonathan's voice before. Maybe we should talk about this in private. No need, answered Rebecca coldly. I completely understand. She pivoted on her heel and strode in the direction of the exit. Jonathan started to say, Rebecca, wait, when Ethan pulled at his sleeve. Are you our father? Quietly, the boy asked. Jonathan's thoughts were stopped by the straightforward inquiry. He lowered himself to look into Ethan's eyes. He saw the reflection of his own eyes. Yes, he replied in a very heavy voice. I think I am. Ethan gave him a serious look and then held out his hand. My name is Ethan. I create art. Unable to resist the young man's powerful grasp, Jonathan accepted the handshake. Someday, I would like to view your work. They're really good, Mason said, moving forward in spite of his seeming hesitancy. Last semester, he took first place in the university's freshman showcase. College? Jonathan's astonishment was evident. Both of you are already enrolled in college? With pride in her voice, Catherine stated, I have full scholarship to NYU. Both of them. Mason is a political science and business student. Ethan is a fine arts student. Jonathan had a peculiar blend of loss and pride. take pride in these successful young men. Sadness for all the significant events he had missed. Reluctantly, he stood up and told Catherine, "I should take care of Rebecca." She said, "You should," then paused. "These lads have been without you for 19 years, Jonathan. Don't commit to anything you can't keep." Although the warning was painful, he understood its protective impulse. "I'm curious about them," he stated firmly. "Both of them?" Catherine gave a wary nod. "After that, we have a lot to talk about." Jonathan's phone rang with an incoming message as if it were a sign. He looked down to see a nicely framed picture of him crouched next to Ethan, Mason, and Catherine close by, sent by an unknown number. "Tech billionaire's secret family," was the caption. What would the value of this narrative be? "What is it?" Seeing his face darken, Catherine inquired. He held up the screen to her. "Someone is observing. By morning, this might make the tabloids." She said, "The boys don't deserve that," as her palm automatically reached out to bring them closer. Jonathan felt an unanticipated burst of protective instinct. "They don't, in fact." He turned to face his two young sons, who watched the adults with differing levels of comprehension. "They must leave this place." Mason folded his arms. "We're capable of taking care of ourselves." Jonathan said, "I've dealt with the press for decades, but I'm sure you can. Believe me." The young man must have been persuaded by something in his tone because he hesitantly nodded. Jonathan's security crew appeared to clear their way as they headed for a side exit. His driver was already waiting outside with the vehicle. As they stood on the curb, Jonathan added, "I'd like to meet properly. Maybe somewhere private tomorrow." Before she answered, Catherine looked at her sons. "We could have lunched together at our house." She provided him with an address in Brooklyn, which is very different from his penthouse in Manhattan. Jonathan promised that I would be present. He felt the weight of Ethan's serious stare as they made contact and shared information. As if learning a face he had pondered about all his childhood, the calm twin had continued to study him. Jonathan's penthouse elevator journey seemed to go on forever. He was abruptly aware of the emptiness of his antiseptic, spotless home as the doors opened and he stood there. Rebecca texted him, and his phone buzzed. "We must speak." However, his thoughts were limited to his face, two faces that were exactly same, and the years he had lost. Jonathan's longtime friend and lawyer, James Reynolds, looked grimly at the extortion letter. Someone inside the gala took the pictures. Even though it was recorded on a phone, it is of professional quality. Jonathan's voice was taut with suppressed wrath as he said, "Find them. My family is not under danger from anyone." He was still learning how to say the term, family, but it felt intensely correct. Head of Security Victor Chen gave a stern nod. "I'll see the security footage right away. This appears to be targeted rather than opportunistic." Jonathan paced in front of the ceiling in Florida. Below, the windows of his Manhattan penthouse splayed like a glistening circuit board. "Harrington, Maxwell." Both men's eyes snapped up. According to Jonathan, Harrington Industries has been attempting to sabotage our Westbridge merger for months. A controversy like this might frighten the board. Victor vowed to look into Harrington's relationships with anyone at the gala. The phone rang for Jonathan. "Catherine?" As he responded, his heart rate increased. Without introducing herself, she stated in a hushed voice, "There's a photographer outside my apartment. The lads are still in the dark. They are preparing for their classes. Remain inside," he said. "Security is on its way." Arrangements were arranged, and Jonathan dressed and took a shower with unusual hurry. The board meeting could wait. There was nothing more crucial than preventing those two young men from becoming the subject of tabloids. Catherine hesitantly unlocked the door when he reached the small Brooklyn brownstone, relief spreading across her face. There were already 2 security guards in the area. She stepped back to let him in and replied, "Thank you." There were bookshelves and framed artwork all over the place, and the flat was cozy and well maintained. Down the hall came the sound of an argument, a sharp contrast to his sleek apartment. "They're still preparing," Catherine clarified. "I informed them that their father would be arriving." Jonathan tensed. What were they saying? Mason had inquiries. "Ethan has been drawing, but he didn't say anything. All morning." She stopped in front of a door. "Have patience with Mason. He is guarded." The door opened before Jonathan could answer. Mason's eyes narrowed in suspicion as he stood there tall and self-assured in university sweats. "You're intrigued after 20 years of silence." He spoke in a difficult tone. Catherine touched her son's shoulder with a warning hand. "Mason." "It's okay," Jonathan said. "It's a reasonable query." He turned to face his son. "I had no idea. Mason, about you. I didn't get your mother's messages until yesterday night." "Simple excuse," Mason sneered. Ethan appeared behind him, more subdued but no less determined. "Why would someone prevent you from receiving her messages?" His inquiry was sincerely inquisitive rather than accusing. Jonathan thought of his old assistant, who had been employed by Eleanor Blake, his mother-in-law at the time. Carefully, he stated, "I have suspicions, but I need to confirm them before making accusations." Mason folded his arms. "You're here now, then. What are you looking for?" Jonathan's response was straightforward, "To know my sons." And he showed them the blackmail message to shield you from what was about to happen. Mason's face grew serious, and Ethan became still. Jonathan clarified that someone is attempting to make money off of this. If it doesn't work, they'll probably still sell the story. The narrative must be within our control. Mason posed a challenge. Jonathan agreed, "Yes, we. Mercer owns you whether you like it or not. There is scrutiny associated with the name." Catherine stepped in. "Let's get breakfast and talk about this. Classes for the lads start at 11. Jonathan's phone vibrated as they made their way to the kitchen, revealing a message from James. "Harrington was seen attempting to meet with board members at your office building. Although the outside threat was rapidly approaching, he was aware of his priorities when Ethan secretly handed him a sketch that was a strikingly realistic representation of Jonathan." Jonathan had no intention of spending his Tuesday morning in Catherine's kitchen having an unplanned strategy discussion. Victor was standing by the window watching the street. Margaret, Jonathan's executive assistant, was sitting on a stool working frantically on her tablet, and James was sitting on a chair going over documents. Margaret, wiping a lock of gray hair from her face, stated that Harrington had already visited with 2 board members. "He is presenting this as a personal failing that might undermine investor trust." Jonathan's jaw tightened. James suggested, "We need to control the narrative because he's using my sons as leverage." "A news release praising your sons? Feeling happy that you found them?" "No," Catherine said as she came in carrying coffee mugs from the kitchen. "I refuse to let my boys become a publicity stunt." Everyone looked at her. Jonathan saw the protective fire in her face, the same resolve that had drawn him to her years before. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he said, "Catherine's right. We don't provide the public an explanation. First, we keep the boys safe." With his arms folded, Mason emerged from the doorway. "We are adults who deserve the truth, not kids in need of protection." He stared at Jonathan. "Everything." Before Ethan joined his brother, notebook in hand, an awkward quiet hung in the room. Quietly, he said, "I have questions." Jonathan gave a nod. "You're entitled to answers." In order to give the family privacy, Margaret excused herself to answer a phone call while James and Victor went outside. With Catherine sitting next to his boys, Jonathan sat across from them, serving as a stark reminder of the rift that had grown over the previous 20 years. "Mom, why did you divorce her?" Mason asked directly. Before responding, Jonathan looked into Catherine's eyes for a moment. "We were young. I worked 18-hour days while I was establishing my business. Catherine desired a family. The old anguish felt unexpectedly new as he faded off. Mason pressed, "That's the official story. Which is the authentic one?" Her son's arm was touched by Catherine. "No, Mason," Jonathan interrupted, "he's right. The truth is that after Catherine missed a significant business function, I was served with divorce papers. She was second in my life, and I assumed she was sick of it." Catherine's gaze grew wide. "Divorce papers were never sent by me. You skipped our appointment for our fertility therapy, so I got them from you." As the consequences dawned on them simultaneously, they gazed at one another. "Mom," Catherine muttered. "Eleanor thought you weren't suitable for the family and never approved of you." The parts came together with a click. Eleanor's insistence on managing their correspondence while they were separated, the help she had suggested to Jonathan, and the practical miscommunications that had caused them to part ways. Jonathan breathed Jesus. Mason glanced between them, doubt becoming to perplexity. "Did your grandmother do this?" Ever perceptive, Ethan inquired. "Jonathan would not have hesitated if you had been aware of the pregnancy. To be there, I would have relocated heaven and earth." Victor retreated inside before anyone could reply, his face solemn. Jonathan muttered, "Sir, Miss Winters is coming toward the building. This address shouldn't be known to Rebecca." Catherine's face tensed as Victor hinted that she might have followed you. "I'll take care of this." Jonathan stood up and firmly said, "No. I have to clean up my mess." At the building entrance, he confronted Rebecca and blocked her way. Her fancy clothes and flawless blonde hair looked out of place in the modest Brooklyn neighborhood. "She accused you of ignoring her calls." "I have been occupied." "With your new family?" The words came out of her mouth. When the truth came out, Jonathan thought of Catherine's eyes, the twins, and the upstairs of 20 years lost. Calmly, he said, "Rebecca. This is no longer going to function." She narrowed her gaze dangerously. "Jonathan, this isn't over." However, Jonathan realized it was already there as he turned to face the brownstone where his true destiny lay. When Jonathan came back after Rebecca had left, he saw Catherine and the twins engaged in a heated discussion. When he walked in, they all became silent, greeting him with 3 identical looks of caution. He told them she wouldn't be an issue, but he wasn't sure whether it was accurate. "Catherine noted that your girlfriend didn't appear happy to learn that you had sons." Jonathan automatically corrected his ex-girlfriend. Mason's mouth twitched in what may have been amusement at the corner. Catherine checked her and remarked, "Well. Observe them. The lads are in class. This should wait until later." In fact, everyone was surprised when Ethan spoke up. He looked at Jonathan and said, "I'd like to skip today. If you don't mind." Mason gazed at his sibling. "You don't ever skip." Ethan gave a shrug. "Art history is not the only significant thing." Jonathan's chest began to bloom with an odd warmth. "What were you thinking of?" Ethan said thoughtfully, "You said you would have been there if you'd known." "I want to know who you were and who you are today." Feeling moved by the suggestion, Jonathan nodded. "That would be nice, too." Mason folded his arms. "At 11, I still had political theory. For some of us, faultless attendance is important." Jonathan found himself stating that becoming defensive is a typical response. "I would also be skeptical. I'm not on the defense." Mason gave a defensive snap, then smiled reluctantly to stop himself. Catherine stepped in with ease. "Come to class, Mason. We'll provide an update." She turned to Jonathan and said, "You later. This afternoon, I have tutorials to teach. Can you wait for me to get back with Ethan? Can you watch your son?" Was a casual question that felt incredibly important. Naturally. Jonathan and Ethan were left in awkward quiet after Mason and Catherine left. Ethan at last said, "If you want to see it, I have a studio space upstairs." The studio in the attic was stunning. The room was filled with large canvases, elaborate charcoal drawings, and sculptures in various degrees of completion. Jonathan navigated it with wonder. He paused in front of a group of portraits and murmured, "This is extraordinary. You have extraordinary talent." Ethan shrugged, but his enjoyment was obvious. "I understand art. More than human beings. Individuals are complex." Ethan grabbed a sketchbook. "Could I?" When Jonathan saw that Ethan wanted to draw him, he nodded. He sat clumsily as his youngster started drawing, confidently moving the pencil. "Why didn't you look into it?" Ethan questioned abruptly. "Were you not intrigued when Mom's messages failed to reach you?" It was a profound question. "I assumed she wanted a fresh start. Your grandmother, Eleanor, told you that Catherine had gone on. Someone was aware." "That was untrue." "Now I see that," Jonathan said. "However, I was wounded 20 years ago and concentrated on creating something that would not turn me away." "Your business." "Indeed." Ethan kept shifting his pencil. "And how did you find that to be?" In some ways, it was more difficult to respond because the straightforward inquiry was judgment-free. Jonathan claimed that he gradually developed an enterprise, rose to become one of the wealthiest men in the nation, and returned home each night to find his penthouse deserted. Ethan's face was unreadable as he looked up. "It sounds lonely." Jonathan admitted that the admission was simpler than he had anticipated. They were silent once more, but this time there seemed to be a peaceful understanding developing between them. Ethan finally stated, "It will be more difficult to persuade Mason. He's protective of you and your mother, I know that." Jonathan looked into his son's and his own eyes and said, "I'm afraid you'll go away again." "I won't." It buzzed on Ethan's phone. His face darkened as he checked it. "What is it?" Jonathan inquired. Ethan handed him the screen, which displayed a news alert with the headline, "Billionaire CEO's, Mercer Air Scandal." The twin sons' secret was made public. The narrative had collapsed. Like wildfire, the article went viral. Reporters had gathered outside the brownstone by the afternoon, and Catherine's phone was ringing constantly. While Ethan calmly brewed tea, apparently undisturbed by the chaos, Jonathan inside coordinated with his crisis team. Ethan placed a mug in front of Jonathan and said that the campus security office had contacted. "In order for us to avoid the main entry tomorrow, they are setting up temporary parking passes." With gratitude, Jonathan took the tea. "I apologize for this." Ethan said plainly, "Not your fault. The story wasn't leaked by you." Breathless and enraged, Mason ran in as the door exploded open. "It's over." Dropping his backpack, he declared, "Campus." During political theory, the headline was projected onto the wall of the lecture hall. Shortly after, Catherine entered, just as agitated as he was. "My department chair recommended that I take a voluntary leave of absence until this is resolved," she continued, her calm facade belying her rage. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair and remarked, "This is exactly what I was afraid of. My legal staff is drafting cease and desist letters for any outlets that publish unapproved images of you three, and I've made arrangements for extra protection." Mason challenged, "Not good enough. Our lives and careers are impacted by this. Mom might lose her job." Jonathan looked into his rebellious son's eyes. "You're correct. It's insufficient." He got up, having made up his mind. "A press conference has been scheduled for tomorrow a.m. We directly addressed this on our terms and then declined to comment further." Catherine had a doubtful expression. "And say just what?" "The truth is that we're getting to know one another in secret and that we're requesting solitude at this time. I recently found out about my sons." "Is that going to work?" Ethan inquired. Jonathan acknowledged that it won't quell the rumors. However, it will aid in setting limits. Mason walked around the living area. "What about grandmother? When she sees this, she'll know we found out what she did." A chill ran through the room at the mention of Eleanor. Catherine's face became stern. "I'll take care of my mom." Jonathan calmly corrected her, "We'll take care of her." Their gazes locked, and Catherine's expression changed as a tentative trust began to develop. That night, Jonathan was by himself in the kitchen with Ethan after Mason withdrew to his room to handle the fallout from social media and Catherine accepted a call from her department. They prepared dinner as though they had done it countless times before, working in cozy silence. "Are you a cook?" As he observed Jonathan expertly chopping veggies, Ethan inquired. "I live alone," Jonathan said, grinning slightly. "Either learn to cook or live off takeaway. Our mother instilled this life skill in us at a young age." Jonathan was reminded of what he had missed. She was correct. The vegetables were spread out on a roasting pan by Ethan. "When he learned that you had sons," he said thoughtfully, "how do you feel?" Jonathan took a moment to think about the question. Astonished, overpowered, and incensed by the wasted time. He gave Ethan a sharp glance while simultaneously feeling thankful for the opportunity to get to know you both. Ethan accepted this with a nod. "What about Mom?" It was an unexpected question for Jonathan. "How about her? Do you still have feelings for her?" There was no question. Jonathan couldn't help but believe it. "We had just graduated from college and were rather young when we got married." She was. He paused, trying to think of something to say. "I ought to have followed her as my compass." "Rather, you pursued ambition." Ethan did appear to assimilate. "This. You know, she never got married again. Over the years, there were a few relationships, but none of them persisted." Mason and Catherine joined them before Jonathan could answer. As the minute went by, Jonathan noticed Catherine observing him with a look that was halfway between caution and interest. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Victor as they sat down to their first family meal together. Rebecca Winters and Harrington were seen getting together at Tribeca restaurant. Verified by surveillance. Despite the growing external threat, Jonathan realized what was worth fighting for after observing the three faces seated around the table. As they waited in the conference room, Jonathan told James, "I'm not ready for this." In half an hour, he would be confronted by a group of reporters who were keen to analyze the most intimate part of his life. "Deals worth billions are negotiated by you." James reminded him it was breakfast time. "This is just another problem for company." Jonathan straightened his tie for the third time and said, "No, it's not. My sons are these." Catherine came in with the twins, all three of them calm yet tense, as the door opened. Mason's decision to wear a more casual blazer over jeans was a tiny show of independence, while Ethan's charcoal suit matched Jonathan's in terms of both design and cost. "You." Jonathan reassured the three that they were not required to take part. "I can manage this on my own." Mason said firmly, "We're not hiding." Catherine agreed, "This impacts us as well. After putting up a united face, we go back to our solitude." Jonathan was surprisingly proud of their fortitude. "Thank you." Jonathan's phone rang while last-minute arrangements were being made. The chairman of the board. He moved aside to answer the phone. "The board is worried, Jonathan." Harold didn't introduce himself. "The perspective of the market is being impacted by this personal circumstance. This morning, our stock fell 3 points. Jonathan reassured him that it will recover. "When investors see this, my leadership skills remain unchanged. An emergency meeting has been called. Your presence is needed for tomorrow." Ethan was studying Jonathan when he hung up the phone, those keen eyes not missing anything. "Trouble with the company?" Quietly, his kid inquired. "Nothing major." Jonathan said a falsehood. "Only the logistics." Though it was clear from his expression that he wasn't convinced, Ethan didn't say anything more. Everything went according to plan during the press briefing. In a succinct, solemn message, Jonathan acknowledged his recently found boys, requested privacy, and declined to comment on the reasons behind their estrangement. When she spoke, Catherine, who was sitting next to him, was composed and clear. The twins' presence and silence served as a visual cue that they were connected. After that, Jonathan felt empty, as though something essential had been taken away, as they departed via a hidden exit. The carefully guarded boundary between his personal and work lives had been permanently broken. "Are you all right?" As they got inside the car, Catherine questioned. "All right," he said automatically. Mason gave a snort. "Correct. You appear to be on the verge of fainting because of this." Jonathan shook his head, but Catherine warned Mason. "He's not incorrect, so it's okay." Jonathan's breathing became labored as he untied his tie. "That's what I've kept my private life for 20 years. Private. This is difficult." Mason remarked, less angrily than previously, "Welcome to our world. Your name has just made our entire life public knowledge." Jonathan felt the word strike him like a blow to the body. He hadn't thought about the long-term effects of his popularity on them. He said, "I'm sorry," with great sincerity. "I wouldn't have picked this for you." Ethan noted quietly that none of us made this choice, but here we are. For the first time in days, Jonathan went back to his penthouse that night. He was impressed again by the silence, the immaculate surfaces, and the unworn furniture. Board members, business associates, and even old acquaintances who were interested in the news had been calling and messaging him non-stop. Doubt began to creep in as he stood in front of his bedroom window that overlooked the city. What was he aware of as a father? How was he going to compensate for 20 years of missed time? What if he had done more harm than good in their lives? His phone rang. "Catherine." She answered, "Just making sure you got home safely." The boys were worried. Were the boys worried? Startled, he repeated. A moment's hesitation. All of us were. It was a demanding day. Jonathan felt a warm sensation unfold in his chest. "I'm all right. I appreciate you checking. Jonathan, get some sleep. Another day will come tomorrow." Jonathan realized with crystal clarity that his apartment no longer felt like home after they hung up. As Jonathan walked inside the boardroom, his phone began to buzz non-stop. There was a noticeable sense of stress as the emergency meeting was about to start. Harold Preston came right over, corporate gravitas taking the place of his normal friendly demeanor. He led him to a quiet area and said, "This is very unusual, Jonathan. The possible effects of optics timing on the Westbridge transaction worry the board." Jonathan said calmly, "My personal life doesn't affect my ability to lead this company." Harold's face was still doubtful. "The market doesn't agree. Harrington is raising worries with our key investors about stability since we're down 5 points. Jonathan's phone flashed Ethan's name before he could reply. He excused himself so he could respond. "Is everything all right?" he inquired right away. "Not at all." Ethan spoke in a strained voice. "A woman is present. Identifies herself as your mother-in-law." Jonathan's blood became icy. "Eleanor. She is insistent on seeing her mother. She's being held at the door by Mason. However, Jonathan assured me that he would be there as quickly as possible. Keep her out." When he turned around, the whole board was observing him, their faces displaying everything from contempt to worry. Jonathan made a quick choice and walked up to the table. "I understand your worries, gentlemen and ladies, but I have a family situation to attend to today." He started off sternly. Harold protested, "Jonathan. The purpose of calling this meeting was to..." Jonathan cut in, "I'll take care of everything tomorrow, but my sons need me right now." The words were unfamiliar to his tongue, yet they were unquestionably correct. He told his chauffeur to set speed records on the way to Brooklyn, leaving the startled boardroom behind. The scene was just as he had feared when he got there. Standing on the porch, Eleanor Blake looked dapper and regal in a pricey suit, her silver hair styled to perfection. If Catherine had an icy heart, she was exactly what she would have become in 30 years. She gave Jonathan a chilly greeting. How practical. "Just now, I was telling these young men that they've been duped." Mason was standing defensively in the doorway. Ethan followed closely behind, alert as usual. Jonathan gave Eleanor a brief nod. This debate has no place here. I disagree, she said. My grandsons have a right to know the true nature of their presumed father. Assumed? Mason asked a pointed inquiry. Eleanor gave a faint smile. Has he given you any evidence? Maybe a paternity test? Or are you just believing what he says? That's sufficient. Catherine appeared next to her sons, and her voice broke through. You have to go, Mother. Catherine, my love, I'm just attempting to keep you safe. I always did it for you. Safe. Jonathan's rage was uncontrollable. Our marriage was ruined by you. Catherine tried to tell me about the twins, but you cut her off. Eleanor maintained her poise. I prevented more disappointment for my daughter. At every stage, you put your business ahead of her. It is not up to you to decide that. Catherine's angry voice wavered. You were not entitled. I was perfectly entitled. Eleanor cut her off. Who was there, besides him, when you returned home heartbroken and expecting twins? This statement's veracity hung in the air. Jonathan moved forward. You made sure I didn't know, which is why I wasn't there. Would it have hurt? Eleanor posed a challenge. Would you have cancelled your overseas flights and valuable business meetings? Jonathan couldn't honestly respond to the question, therefore it touched a nerve. He might not have been able to handle the situation as the man he was 20 years ago. Finally, he said, the past is done. The present is crucial. Eleanor gave a sharp laugh. How easy it is for you to make that choice. Ethan spoke up out of the blue, Grandmother. Mom sent you some certified letters, did you retain them? The ones that were sent back. For a second, Eleanor froze. However, it was sufficient. You did, Mason realized, his expression turning horrified. You retained the proof. Eleanor insisted on keeping you safe. In the same way that he let your mother down, this man will let you down. That's the risk we're taking, Ethan said softly. It's not up to you to decide. Perhaps for the first time, Eleanor noticed that her grandsons were no longer youngsters to be controlled but rather men. She turned and headed to her waiting car without saying another word. Jonathan felt Catherine's hand momentarily brush against his as they watched her go, a quiet recognition of the redrawn lines of joint battle. As Jonathan went over the last-minute preparations for the Westbridge merger presentation, the early sun peeked through Catherine's kitchen window. Half of the table was occupied by his laptop and papers, creating an odd corporate island in the cozy room. More coffee? Catherine interrupted his focus to offer. With gratitude, Jonathan pushed his empty mug forward and murmured, please. She poured from the carafe and grinned, I apologize for taking over your kitchen. Everything is all right. It's good to see it put to use for purposes other than studying late at night. It had been 2 weeks since Eleanor's altercation. Jonathan had split up his time. Every day brought little triumphs and disappointments, from rescuing the merger deal that Harrington's meddling had almost ruined to establishing fragile relationships with his sons. Jonathan checked his watch and stated, the board meeting is at 4. It should be simple after we show the updated financials, Catherine said, leaning against the counter. Will you be able to attend the 7 o'clock opening of Ethan's gallery? Jonathan promised her that she wouldn't miss it. I have 3 reminders for it on my calendar. It's very important to him, she answered quietly. You're there. Jonathan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Ethan had started to open up to Mason despite his ongoing reluctance, sharing his artwork, ideas, and silent observations. Every interaction was cherished even though Jonathan hadn't earned it. His phone rang. James, his lawyer. James. His. Without introducing himself, James stated that the Harrington situation had gotten worse. Citing a conflict of interest, he has moved for an injunction against the merger. For what reasons? Jonathan made a demand. He is accusing you of being distracted by your family problems. Shareholders should have been informed of that. Although it's weak, it has caused the signing to be delayed. Right there, I'll be. With a look of exasperation on his face, Jonathan hung up. Issue? Catherine inquired. Jonathan gathered his papers and explained, Harrington. He is posing legal challenges to the merger. Just delaying strategies, nothing major. Why does he care so much about this merger? Because without it, our patents on renewable energy are no longer available to his company. For years, he has been attempting to obtain them. Jonathan took another look at his watch. I had to leave. Ethan showed up in the doorway with a sizable painting portfolio while he was packing his briefcase. Are you heading out? With a tone of disappointment, he inquired. Jonathan told him it would only be for a few hours. Urgent business matter. When your gallery opens tonight, I'll come back. Jonathan saw the glimmer of uncertainty on his son's face as Ethan nodded. He added firmly, I swear. I will be there no matter what. Jonathan and his colleagues spent the afternoon deconstructing Harrington's legal concerns, point by point, during the emergency board meeting. It was 6:30 p.m. when they were done. As the discussion came to an end, Harold demanded that we finalize these responses tonight. Tomorrow morning, Harrington's team will return to court. Jonathan had already started to gather his supplies. I've already committed to something. You could feel Harold's disdain. This is how the business will develop in the future, Jonathan. Talking. Jonathan checked his phone and said, and I'll be back to work on it at 9. Catherine missed 3 calls. But my son needs me right now. Harold echoed doubtfully, your son. You've known this person for 2 weeks. Jonathan stopped and stared steadily at Harold. Indeed, Harold. The one with whom I've already missed too many milestones. Uncomfortably silent, he hurried to his car and called Catherine as he left the boardroom. When she replied, he said, I'm on my way. Is everything all right? The gallery is packed, she said, her voice almost drowned out by background commotion. Ethan's gaze remains fixed on the entrance. Jonathan told his chauffeur to take all the shortcuts he could and promised to be there in 20 minutes. Jonathan's phone rang once more as they made their way through evening traffic. His executive assistant is Margaret. Mr. Harrington and his legal team just showed up at the office, sir. The board will meet again soon. With a familiar conflict tugging at him, Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. He wouldn't have hesitated to turn the car around for 20 years. First was always business. Tell them I'll make a remote call after 9, he said. I'm at the opening of my son's gallery. They're insistent, sir. Jonathan firmly stated, then they can insist until 9 o'clock, Margaret. Certain things cannot be negotiated. As the automobile arrived at Chelsea's little gallery, he hung up. Through the windows, he could see a packed room with people drinking wine and Ethan addressing a small group of people in the middle. Jonathan had rarely seen such an excited expression on his face. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Jonathan put his tie straight and stepped inside, putting his son before his empire. As visitors wandered between Ethan's eye-catching canvases, the gallery was alive with chatter. Jonathan stopped close to the door, observing his son, who was confident and well-spoken, describing his work to a receptive audience. He felt a surge of pride in his chest that was so strange that it nearly ached. Catherine showed up beside him. With a tone of relief, she remarked, You made it. With his eyes fixed on Ethan, Jonathan answered, I said I would. Indeed, but she paused. Jonathan wouldn't have in the past. For her, he completed. The board meeting would have been Jonathan's choice in the past. She acknowledged it with a nod. Individuals evolve. Some people, he said, turning to face her at last. She was strikingly similar to the young woman he had fallen in love with decades before, especially in the soft lighting of the gallery. Mason, where are you? Catherine, who seemed to be uninterested in art, nodded toward the back wall in support of his brother. Jonathan grinned as he noticed his other son talking to a young woman while standing close to a sizable abstract painting. He still feels resentful of me. Catherine clarified that he is careful. It doesn't go away suddenly after 20 years of wondering why his father wasn't there. Jonathan was about to reply when Ethan saw him. A brief smile crossed the young man's lips before he collected himself and excused himself from his admirers to get closer. "You arrived," he remarked plainly. Jonathan said, "I wouldn't miss it." "Ethan, your work is amazing." The look on his son's face softened. "Do you want to take a tour? I want to show you one artwork in particular." As his son described his creative process and sources of inspiration, Jonathan listened carefully as he led Ethan throughout the exhibition. They paused in front of a triptych of abstract portraits, 3 canvases with disjointed faces that, when considered as a whole, somehow made sense. Ethan clarified, his voice now softer, that this is known as genetic memory. "I painted it before to our meeting. The thought of you was always the inspiration." Jonathan's throat tightened with emotion as he scanned the striking pictures. 2 other faces, one of which was unmistakably Mason's, and the third, which was Ethan's, flanked the primary face. Jonathan reached for the canvas and recognized it was me, but he stopped himself. Ethan gave a nod. "I utilized my mother's old pictures in addition to what I saw in the mirror." In addition to Jonathan's physical attributes, the photo conveyed something fundamental about him, such as his eyes, jawline, drive, or loneliness. Jonathan said, "Thank you," in words that were insufficient to express his feelings. A disturbance beside the entryway cut short their moment. Jonathan turned and saw Rebecca, with a thundering face, storming past the gallery attendant. "Of course you're here," she said loudly, attracting everyone's attention while ignoring your obligations to your immediate family. Jonathan acted swiftly to stop her before she could cause any more disruptions. "This isn't the place, Rebecca," she muttered, "the board is waiting. While you pretend to be the father, Harrington is snatching the merger from you." "Slow down," Jonathan said, leading her to the door. "My son's night is tonight." "Your son?" Rebecca gave a sour laugh. "You were completely unaware of his existence 2 weeks ago." Mason appeared next to them, his face icy. "You ought to go, in my opinion." Rebecca gave him a contemptuous look. "And the other one must be you. Has he told you yet how much his business is losing because of your little family drama?" Jonathan experienced a moment of real rage. "That's sufficient. Is it accurate?" Mason stared at Jonathan as he asked. Rebecca grinned, content to sow discord. "The stock has experienced a 12-point decline. The merger of Westbridge is failing. A vote of no confidence is being considered by the board." With a protective hand on Mason's shoulder, Catherine joined them. "This conversation is not appropriate at this time or location." "Is it true, Mom?" Mason continued. Jonathan moved forward. "Indeed, there are difficulties in business." "No, you shouldn't worry about them." Mason contended that if they are, it's because of us. Jonathan said resolutely that the business would bounce back. "You are more significant." Everyone, even Jonathan, was taken aback by the words that lingered in the air. Rebecca gaped at him incredulously. "You've gone crazy," she said. "You've built an empire for 20 years, and you're tossing it away for nothing? Are you playing house with your ex-wife and your unidentified adult sons?" Beside him, Jonathan sensed Catherine's tension, but his own reaction was surprisingly composed. "Rebecca, you ought to leave. We're finished." Jonathan turned to see that Ethan had joined them after she hurried out, temporarily forgetting about his exhibition. "I apologize for it." Embarrassed, Jonathan said. He was shocked to hear Mason speak first. "Were you serious? That we are more significant than your business?" Jonathan didn't hesitate to meet his son's probing look. Indeed. He had never seen Mason grin before. It was a modest, reserved gesture, but it was a start. Ethan's workshop was filled with wide windows that let in late afternoon sunshine, which created lengthy shadows on the wooden floor. Jonathan watched his son paint a fresh canvas while he sat in peaceful calm. Form is created from chaos with bold, broad strokes. With Jonathan splitting his time between resolving business disputes and fostering ties with his sons, the last 3 weeks had fallen into an unusual rhythm. "You're quiet today," Ethan said, keeping his eyes on his painting. Jonathan grinned as he pondered. "Concerning the business?" "No," Jonathan said candidly, referring to how cozy this feels. "Observing your work from here." Ethan stopped, the brush lingering on the canvas. "Sometimes it does feel natural, doesn't it? As if you've been here all along." Jonathan was profoundly moved by the straightforward observation. Before he could reply, Mason entered the studio through the open door, his face abnormally disturbed. "Professor Bennett dropped his luggage on the floor and abruptly said that my thesis proposal was rejected. Claimed that it lacks originality and wisdom." Ethan put his brush down. "That isn't feasible. You have spent the entire semester working on that proposal." Mason paced the cramped room, his frustration palpable. "My work appears to be uninspired and derivative." His precise words. Jonathan didn't say anything, knowing that this wasn't his time. He was still learning how to deal with the brothers' unique language and mutual support system. Ethan stated bluntly that Bennett is a jerk. "Everyone is aware of that." With a hand over his hair, Mason retorted, "An asshole who controls whether I graduate with honors." A startlingly similar gesture to Jonathan's own. "What was the subject of your proposal?" At last, Jonathan inquired. Mason paused, then let out a sigh. "Disparity in wealth amongst post-industrial cities. Concentrating on ways that business investment can boost the local economy without causing gentrification." Jonathan gave a thoughtful nod. "That sounds valuable." "Not in Bennett's opinion," Mason murmured. "He advised me to pick a less ambitious option. According to Ethan's translation, he intends to pick anything that doesn't contradict the current quo." Jonathan got up and walked over to where Mason had started pacing again. "Could you show me what you have written thus far?" Mason hesitated, then took a folder out of his bag and gave it to him. Jonathan attentively studied the proposal and was struck by its creative approach, meticulous research, and clarity of thought. "To be honest," he said, "this is excellent work." Mason gave a snort. "Tell Bennett that." Jonathan noted that Bennett is not the only professor in the department. "Have you thought about asking for a different advisor?" "It doesn't operate that way. Bennett is the chair of the Economic Policy Department. His word is final." Jonathan returned the proposal. "Until you decide otherwise, nothing is final." "Easy for you to say," Mason said, a trace of the old resentment showing. "Buying our way out of problems isn't an option for some of us." Jonathan understood the frustration behind the hurtful statements. "That wasn't what I was saying." "What were you proposing, then?" "Your hard work should be acknowledged, and when the obvious route is blocked, you may need to take a different route." Jonathan could see Ethan was paying close attention, even though he had returned to painting, apparently lost in his job. Jonathan went on, "I've been dealing with similar blockades with Harrington." Mason viewed him with skepticism, as straightforward approaches aren't often the most successful. "And how are things going for you?" "It's a work in progress," Jonathan said, grinning slightly. "However, neither I nor you should give up." Mason's face changed in some way. A readiness to think, but not quite acceptance. "I'll give it some thought." Ethan put down his brush once more after Mason departed to attend a study session. "You know, that's the first time he's asked for your assistance in his own manner." Jonathan was unaware. "I'm hoping I didn't go too far." "No," Ethan responded reflectively. "You fulfilled your role as a father." For Jonathan, the mere affirmation was more significant than any financial achievement. Ethan kept going back to his canvas, the one with all the answers, since he's always been the self-assured one. He finds it difficult to be vulnerable. Ethan added a crimson stripe to his painting and said, "You two are very different, not as different as everyone thinks." Simply said, we were our doubts in different ways. Jonathan was impressed by his quieter son's understanding as he observed him at work. "And how are yours worn?" Then Ethan's hand froze. "Mason converts his into disputes, whereas I turn them into art." "What about Catherine?" "Mommy?" Ethan's features broke into a tiny smile. "When Mom is anxious, she bakes. Did you not notice? Since you returned to our lives, a lot of cookies have been consumed." At exactly noon, Eleanor Blake's Mercedes arrived at Catherine's brownstone. Jonathan looked out the window of the living room. She came out looking as presentable as ever, her silver hair and poise exuding confidence. The twins were standing close by, their stances displaying tension. Catherine whispered to her sons, "You don't have to do this today. This argument can wait." "No," Mason firmly said. "We've had enough of waiting for the truth." Ethan nodded in agreement, his steely resolve taking the place of his normally reserved manner. After discovering his sons, Jonathan had spent 4 weeks establishing shaky bonds, avoiding corporate sabotage, and figuring out the deceptions that had kept them apart. At last, they were prepared to face Eleanor head-on. The doorbell rang. Before responding, Catherine inhaled deeply. "Mom." She stepped back to let Eleanor enter, greeting her coolly. With a moment's hesitation, Eleanor rushed in and spotted Jonathan standing next to her grandsons. "I didn't know we were having a family reunion," she said, getting better fast. Jonathan said, "That's exactly what this is, even though you've done everything you can to make sure it never happened." Eleanor squinted her eyes. "If you've brought me here just to level more charges." Mason interrupted, "Not accusations. Proof." Jonathan pointed to the well-organized documents on the dining table. The family home's attic included copies of Catherine's returned letters, phone logs, and, most damning of all, Eleanor's personal appointment book from 20 years prior, which Catherine had discovered. "What is this?" Though it appeared from the glint of fear in her eyes that she already knew, Eleanor demanded. Ethan whispered, "Grandmother, please sit down. We have inquiries." His tone must have reached someone. Her calm exterior was starting to show as she sat down carefully for Eleanor. Catherine's mother was seated immediately across from her. With sadness in her voice, she continued, "I trusted you. When I found out I was pregnant and Jonathan didn't answer my calls, I turned to you for support when the divorce papers arrived. Eleanor insisted, and I backed you. I've always kept you safe. By deceiving me." The appointment book was pushed ahead by Catherine. "By setting up appointments with Jonathan's assistant to make sure he never received my messages. By giving my letters back before he got a chance to read them." Eleanor's hands shook a little. "He was expanding his fortune, you were grieving, and you were expecting twins. You and those infants would have been impediments to him." Jonathan interrupted, struggling to maintain a level voice, "That wasn't your decision to make." Eleanor retorted, "You consistently put your company ahead of my daughter. What should I have thought?" Mason bent over. "Thus, you made the decision to eliminate the option completely." Eleanor looked at each of them, her demeanor showing signs of desperation. "I did everything I could to keep you and your mother safe." "From what?" Ethan inquired. "From our dad. From disillusionment." Eleanor eventually lost her temper. "From a man who never prioritized his family. Who would abandon Catherine to raise twins by herself while he traveled the world, establishing his valuable business." Her words lingered in the air, and the room grew silent. Jonathan finally stated, in a quiet but forceful voice, "You might have been right about me then. I was determined, ambitious, and more concerned about accomplishment than anything else. However, you denied me the opportunity to get up to the event. To become the parent these sons so richly deserved. And now you believe you are worthy of that opportunity?" Eleanor posed a challenge. 20 years later. Yes, before Jonathan could respond, Catherine said. He does. Eleanor gazed incredulously at her daughter. Catherine interrupted, he didn't put me through anything after everything he put you through. You did. By deceiving us both. Mason touched the shoulder of his grandmother. Grandmother, we're not here to disparage you. We comprehend. You believed you were defending your mother. However, because to your choices, we lost 20 years with our father, Ethan added. Furthermore, we cannot reclaim that time. Eleanor's meticulously preserved facade came crashing down. For the first time, Jonathan saw an elderly woman who had made terrible mistakes due to misplaced love, rather than the powerful matriarch. With tears in her eyes, she muttered, I never meant to cause such harm. Despite everything, Catherine reached across the table and took her mother's hand, saying, I really thought I was saving you from greater pain. Mom, I understand. However, you didn't make the decision. Jonathan watched as his sons, justifiably angry, moved to console their grandmother as Eleanor broke down in tears. In that instant, he saw the compassion that he had once liked in Catherine and now admired in his kids, mirrored in both of them. At last, the painful yet purifying truth was out in the open. As Jonathan finished his presentation, the boardroom fell hushed, like the first breath after emerging from deep outer space. It had been 5 days since the argument with Eleanor and 6 weeks since he had found out about his sons. Jonathan had by then devised a thorough plan to fend off Harrington's assaults on both a personal and professional level. Jonathan pointed to the financial charts on the screen and said, the evidence is irrefutable. Harrington Industries made a conscious effort to influence our stock by interfering directly with the Westbridge deal and leaking misleading information. Harold Preston cleared his throat and said, our legal team has prepared actions accordingly. Jonathan, this is comprehensive, but it's still unclear if you'll be able to continue to lead throughout this family crisis. Harold and Jonathan responded equally, my family is not a situation, and I think my performance over the last 6 weeks shows that I can manage both obligations. In support of her boss, Margaret remarked, the merger is back on track. Since then, the stock has gained 8 points. We started our counterplan. Mason moved forward from his calm seat at the rear of the room. To everyone's surprise, including Jonathan's, he said, if I may. And you're Jonathan's son, Mason Mercer, one board member questioned doubtfully. His face was revealing. He showed no expression, but Jonathan could tell that his shoulders were tense. In contrast to market rivals, I have been evaluating how well your business has performed under my father's direction amid difficult personal times. He gave each member of the board a folder. Due in large part to my father's leadership style, Mercer Technologies often beats rivals during times of crisis. His capacity to handle personal difficulties and organizational resilience are directly related. As the board members flipped through the statistics, the room echoed with astonished comments. Where did you find out about this? Despite himself, Harold inquired, obviously amazed. Mason retorted, market analyses, quarterly reports, and public records. At NYU, I'm finishing up my economic policy thesis. Jonathan was in full shock as he looked at his son. Mason had been working on this project in secret for the last 2 weeks following the rejection of his initial thesis. Mason went on to say that it would be clearly detrimental to the interests of shareholders to remove my father from his position as CEO during this time. As board members began to go over the material, the room fell silent once more. Harold finally sighed and put his folder down. He noted dryly that it appears the Mercer analytical instinct runs in the family. Excellent, Jonathan. At this point, the board will not take any steps to alter the leadership. Jonathan watched Mason gather his supplies as the conference came to an end, uncertain of how to thank Mason without making his still wary son look foolish. When they were alone, he finally said, that was unexpected. Mason shrugged, but it was impossible to conceal the look of delight on his face. The facts were sound. Even I must confess that your leadership metrics are excellent. Thank you, said Jonathan plainly. For being here at all, not just for the support. Mason's expression changed in some way. It might have been a softening or an acknowledgement of their progress. I couldn't allow Harrington to win, though. It would be a bad family plan. The term family hovered between them, both significant and ephemeral. Later that afternoon, as Catherine was preparing supper, Jonathan found himself back in her kitchen, retelling the board meeting. Ethan sketched while sitting at the counter, looking up from time to time to listen to what was being spoken. With a proud smile on her lips, Catherine said, "So Mason rode to the rescue." Jonathan attested to his genius. "I was really unprepared for that analysis." Ethan disclosed that he had been working on it for weeks and that establishing empirical proof of paternal competence was crucial. Jonathan chuckled. "He sounds like that." With her hands busy slicing vegetables, Catherine emphasized that he had to figure out how to connect on his own. Mason uses data to process what Ethan uses art to process. Mason dropped his backpack on the floor when the front door opened. Without a preamble, Bennett declared that he had accepted my revised theory. Claimed it was quite enlightening. Mason joined them in the kitchen, embracing his mother with a healthy dose of tolerance as they exchanged congratulations. Jonathan continued, "I also received a call from Westbridge. Harrington is retreating, and the merger is once again on pace." "Good," Mason stated firmly, "but that implies that I only contributed to my father's rise to the position of corporate dictator. My pals who are socialists would be horrified." The joke. It seemed like a win for Mason to make the first one in front of Jonathan. As the sun sank outside, the four of them danced around the kitchen, preparing dinner in a routine that was starting to feel familiar. Catherine's face transformed as she saw who was calling when her phone rang. She hesitated before responding, "It's Mother." Eleanor invited them all to Sunday supper, and they could all hear her voice. A hesitant, hopeful offering for peace. With a question in her eyes, Catherine turned to face Jonathan. He gave a nod. She informed her mother, "We'll be there. Every one of us." Jonathan glanced at his kids as they sat down to dinner, at Mason as he passionately explained his theory, at Ethan as he listened, and at Catherine, whose eyes met his with a mutual appreciation of their progress. For the first time in 2 decades, Jonathan felt more like a parent and more like family than a CEO. A year later, Jonathan's Hamptons Beach property was surrounded by softly crashing waves. Even Ethan, with his artist's eye, thought the view was nearly too good to paint because of the golden glow that the late afternoon sun put on the sea. Observing his son strolling along the shore, Jonathan stood on the deck. Mason made strong gestures while he talked, obviously engaged in one of his heated arguments about corporate ethics or economic theory, and Ethan listened with his usual quiet focus, occasionally adding what Jonathan had learned to be well-placed remarks that frequently completely changed Mason's viewpoint. Catherine joined Jonathan at the railing with 2 glasses of wine and remarked, "They're so different, yet so similar." Their fingertips briefly touched as she handed him one. Jonathan smiled and accepted the glass, saying, "Like us." All of their lives had changed in the last year. In the end, the Westbridge transaction was successful, solidifying Mercer Technologies' dominance in the sector. After graduating with honors and weighing several high-profile offers, Mason shocked everyone by agreeing to work for Jonathan's company, specifically in the recently established Community Investment Division, which concentrated on moral corporate growth in post-industrial areas. After graduating with a fine arts degree, Ethan staged his first solo exhibition, a series that explored identity and connection and was hailed by critics as emotionally poignant and strikingly mature. Jonathan's office now included a large picture of Jonathan, Catherine, and the twins called One Piece. After being lifted from the shadow of secrets and animosity, Catherine's academic career flourished and she was appointed to department chair at the university. And in what was arguably the most surprising turn of events, Eleanor had slowly made her way back into their life, her first hesitant attempts at reconciliation developing into sincere attempts to make things right. Catherine interrupted his introspection and remarked, "Penny for your thoughts." Jonathan grinned. "Only considering how much has changed. I was unaware that I had sons until a year ago. Life without them is now unthinkable." You know, they can't imagine life without you either, she said quietly. Mason, too, though he would never acknowledge it. Jonathan laughed. Like his mother, he is obstinate. And motivated. Similar to his dad. As they watched their sons, they slipped into a relaxed stillness. From awkward ex-spouses to co-parents to friends, and finally to something more, Jonathan and Catherine's relationship had also changed over time. They had been cautious, moving slowly, and keeping in mind the complicated dynamics of their family and their 2 decades of living apart. Suddenly, Jonathan put down his wine glass and remarked, "I have something for you." "Hold on." A few seconds later, he came back with a little package, beautifully wrapped. As he gave it to her, Catherine arched one eyebrow. "For what purpose is this?" "See by opening it." "Within?" "On a plain chain, place a delicate silver key." Catherine's expression showed uncertainty as she looked up. Jonathan said, "I thought the chain might make it easier to keep track of, but it's not jewelry." "What is a key to?" His voice grew softer as he continued, "To whatever you want. This residence. My penthouse. An whole different location. Our next chapter can be built wherever you like." When Catherine realized what he meant, her eyes grew wide. "Jonathan." He swiftly added, "I'm not asking you to marry me again, at least not yet. I believe we've both realized that we're not good at making snap decisions. However, I'm requesting that you think about a future we can share. Every one of us." With tears welling up in her eyes, Catherine gripped the key hard. 20 years ago, all I wanted was for you to put your family before your business, to pick us. And now. And I've finally realized what's important." For her, Jonathan completed the task. "Is it better to be late than never?" Mason's voice came up from the beach before she could answer. "Mom. Dad. Check out what Ethan discovered." Jonathan still felt a surge of emotion whenever he heard the word "dad." 3 months after their discovery, on a contentious family game night, Mason had used it for the first time, not Jonathan, or the awkward avoidance of any name, at all. Ethan's knowing look at Jonathan had reaffirmed the moment's importance, but it had come so easily that Mason hadn't even seemed to notice. With the key resting against her collarbone, Catherine wrapped the chain around her neck. She smiled and added, "We should go see what exciting discovery warrants interrupting this moment," but her eyes betrayed the deeper intention behind her gesture. Together, they strolled down to the beach, where Ethan was squatting close to the water's edge, looking at something in the sand. He looked up as they got closer, wearing the faint smile Jonathan had learned to love. Ethan held out the fragile white disc and said that it was a flawless sand dollar. Undamaged. "There is very little chance of finding one like this." Catherine added, glancing meaningfully at Jonathan, "It's a sign of good luck." Mason gave a friendly eye roll. "Mom, it's not all metaphors. A sand dollar can occasionally just be a sand dollar." Jonathan threw an arm around each of his son's shoulders and said, "And sometimes. It serves as a reminder that, if you know where to seek, precious items can withstand adversity and survive intact." Together, the 4 of them strolled back toward the house as the sun started to drop, creating long shadows across the beach. Jonathan looked back at their sand footsteps. 4 sets of rails that eventually advanced together, occasionally diverging and occasionally convergent. For Jonathan Mercer, success 20 years ago meant shares, pricing, corporate acquisitions, and worldwide influence. He now realized what real success meant as he watched his sons rush up the beach steps as Catherine giggled at their antics. "Who you create it with, not what you build. It's the love you cultivate along the way, not the empire you build." The key caught the last of the golden rays of sunlight as Catherine slipped her hand into his as they arrived at the deck. In response to his earlier query, she muttered, "Better late than never." "Better, for sure."